All right, we're going to have Andy Paul get up here. He's a CTA and a renowned magician. Or did I mistake that? No, I don't think he's a renowned magician. He's going to get up here and talk some more hybrid cloud for us, so this should be good stuff.
Great, thank you. Is the mic on? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. How y'all doing? Everybody awake? All right, that's something. Good lunch, hard to stay awake afterwards. I'll try to keep it lively, as best I can at least. So my name is Andy Paul. We encourage, as you've seen earlier, tweeting, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever social media platform, take pictures. You can win prizes for that. You can tag me if you want to. Biggest thing is make sure you use the right hashtag there, the MyCUGC. That way you get credit. So very quickly about me, because this is not about me, but just so you know who I am. My name is Andy Paul. I am a CTA, so Citrix Technology Advocate. I'm also president of Cloud9 Services. We're a white label, white glove, pro services organization. So I live and breathe design and implementations all the time. My claim to fame, if you will, is I did write a book on this. It's a few years old. It is available. As a matter of fact, I have copies if anybody wants. My wife is on me clean out the house. I got stacks of these things. So if you would like a book, see me afterwards. I'll happily give you one. You can order on Amazon if you're so inclined. You don't need to. Now, I would like to say I got a 5-star rating on Goodreads for this one. I got a 2-star rating on Amazon, so I mean, it is so boring according to one of the reviews, which, it's not War and Peace. I don't know what they were expecting. It's a Zen-app book, but, I'll take it anyway. So, enough about me. What about you all? Who here is using Citrix DaaS already? I know there's some hands earlier. How many people are using the Citrix Cloud, or CVAD, or Zen-app, or it goes through so many different names. Who here still calls it Zen-app, by the way? There's more hands than use DaaS. I call it Zen-app. I call it NetScaler. I use all the old names because that's what I'm used to using. Everybody knows what I mean when I say it. So if I slip up, you all will understand why. Is anybody in here using workloads on Azure? Okay, quite a few. All right, how many of you all are using Citrix on Azure? Okay, about the same amount. All right, good to know. So and then for those of you doing on Azure or anybody here doing a hybrid solution, we have some on premises and some in the cloud. There's a handful, and that's what the focus of this is really about the hybrid cloud. This is going to be more about design considerations. Some of the other speakers dove deep into some of the technology weeds, which is absolutely critical. This is going to be a little bit higher level, more about what is hybrid cloud, what's the purpose behind the deployments, some of the design principles. I'll delve slightly into licensing. I know Rich mentioned this earlier, so it's important to understand the licensing ramifications if you have on-premise. And the long-term goal is what's right for you, not necessarily what's right for somebody else. So your environment is going to be different. That's the nice thing is at the end of the day, we have roundtable discussions. That's a perfect time to talk about, hey, this is what I'm doing in my environment. What do you think about this or that? But no two environments are going to be exactly the same. So before I dive into that, about 2.5 months ago, I broke my arm. I actually broke the elbow on my left arm. Running into dinner to get reservation for me and my wife at a steakhouse, tripped over the curb, went down hard. It was not graceful. You're probably thinking, what's that got to do with anything? I'm going to get back to that a little bit later. So see, I got to suspense, keep you on the edge of your seat there, because it does tie in. But let's, where to start with design. So, I mentioned design. Where do we start? Start with asking the questions. Who, what, where, when, why, how. Any journalists or English majors in here? None? In this group, I'm shocked. But you may recall some of these questions. Anytime you're writing a story, these are the questions you ask. Doing a design, it's the same thing. You're writing the story, so you got to ask those questions. The why is easy. I mean, the world is changing. We all know that. And it was changing before COVID hit. COVID just accelerated the remote workforce. And there's all kinds of stats. I have some up here behind me. But the numbers don't really matter because obviously if you weren't using this, you wouldn't be here. As far as hybrid strategy, so why hybrid? Where does that come into play? There's definitely flexibility with hybrid solutions. There's growth. You have cost factors. A lot of the customers I see doing hybrid look at it from a burst capacity. Some do it for test dev. Some are doing it as a long-term migration to a pure cloud play. What you're doing for your environment may be one of those, it may be something different. The idea, though, is when you go hybrid, you can stretch out some of those costs, stretch out some of the investment, and reduce your risk, which is really what it's about. Reduce expense, reduce risk. That's what's going to make your top-line managers very happy. As far as what features you need, again, that's going to depend upon your environment, but these are the questions that you want to ask, or the questions you want to answer as you're presenting a plan to your management team. Such as secure access, what are you doing with your applications? Because at the end of the day, no matter what else we talk about, it's about the applications. It's about people being empowered to do their job. Because if they can't do their job, it doesn't matter. Which leads to who? Who needs to do that job? Who are your users? What are they doing? Who's your target audience? Because as an IT geek, I'm like, well, I want to play with the new toys. I want to be cutting edge. I want to use the new technologies. But if I'm not solving a solution for my company, then there's no point of either spending the time or the resources. So how am I making the company better? Or how am I making my customers better? So for example, with users, it may not just be hey, I need to sign into my EMR. It's going through the entire workflow of, that sign-in process. Maybe that's really a badge process. Maybe it's a tap and go, and they have to connect all the way through the workflow. So you start with that bigger picture of, hey, the user has to log in. That's an easy answer. Okay, now let's understand the process of what it takes for that user to log in. And so you can dive deeper. Start high level and drill down into the details. Along with the users, not just what they do, what applications they use, how do they work? Because if you don't make it easy for them, they're not going to use it. How many in here work with healthcare? Oh, lots of hands. Before I ask this next question, are there any doctors in the house? Okay. Are doctors easy users to support? So lots of laughter. I've worked with lots of healthcare. I've worked with lots of doctors. And I love doctors. They help fix my broken arm. But traditionally, they're hard to support sometimes because they want to do something a certain way. This is the way they do it. They've always done it. They want to do it. Any changes are a problem. And if doctors aren't happy in the hospital, nobody's happy. And so that's something to consider. How do they work? How do your users work? What types of endpoints are they using? Thin clients. Do they need badges? Do they need printers? Do they need scanners? And obviously there's going to be a variety. Different people use different things. Sticking with healthcare, your intake is going to be different than your room visits. So it's a combination of those factors, understanding who your users are, because that's what you need to design for. You're not designing for Azure. You're not designing for Citrix. You're designing for your users, who they are, what they do. And this right here, this is timeless. We could have talked about this with XenApp 6.5 or XenDesktop 7.15 or Citrix DAS. This consideration is the same no matter what, because you're not designing for the technology, you're designing for the users. One of the things I always like to do when I'm working with an organization is go through the exercise of a use case mapping. Who are your users? What do they need? Because if you ask 3 people, you might get 6 answers. So it varies. So you'll find that as you go through with use case mapping, that you can start to group different users in different roles into collections. They may be different departments. They might have different titles, but what they need to do, in other words, which applications they need, which devices they need, what services they need, were the same. So that becomes not 50 different use cases, that becomes 5 use cases. Or it could become 2 use cases. You keep filtering it down. Now, there's always a limit on how far you can filter things down. But in my opinion, anybody get the reference here? Thank you. I got my drum roll over here. Thank you, sir. So who your users are can help dictate what you need to service. So then it becomes, what solution is best? And again, there's going to be a variety here. You have a virtual desktop. Hey, just give them a desktop. All their apps are there. They're happy. That's kind of the easy button. That can also be an expensive button, too. You have the hosted shared desktop, or as I like to call kind of the old published desktop XenApp model, where you have multiple users running on the same desktop. Nice thing is, with Azure, you have access to the AVD, you have access to multi-session OS on Windows 10, so this isn't just a server operating system play anymore. But this is going to be a higher density play. So depending upon your use case, it's still worth a consideration. VDI can mean lots of things to lots of people. It doesn't have to just be a desktop. And never forget, you still have session-based computing or hosted apps. The really traditional XenApp model, that still plays. Everything that we talk about with DAS or Citrix Cloud, all of these are potential workloads. You can do desktop OS, you can do server OS, you can do published desktops, you can do published apps. In most environments, it's going to be a mix, which comes back to understanding the users. So stepping away from that, okay, say we know our users, all right, or we have a good idea at least. I always take a layered approach to design. And again, this is a fairly timeless item. It applies across Citrix, across the years, and across other platforms. But going down through your business layer, what are you wanting to accomplish? Your user layer, we spent a lot of time on that already. But then access, how are they getting in? Control, how am I managing it? Where are my resources running? And even when we're talking cloud, we still have to understand on-premise versus cloud, or in this case, hybrid. We still have to understand the access and control layers, managing how people are getting in and running the environment. We still have to understand resources. Resources, that's where your apps are at. And hardware. Maybe the hardware is in somebody else's cloud now. But hardware includes your sizing. So what instances are you building out in Azure to map your workloads? So I always start with the big picture. A friend of mine that used to work with me said I could never talk without a marker in my hand because I live in front of the whiteboard. And that's the first thing I do. I'm a visual person. So I've asked my friend Bob here to paint a picture for us. And as we paint the big picture, this may not be where you end up, but it's a start. It's a visualization. People understand pictures. It makes it easy to communicate. I always start with a picture. Now, I usually take a whiteboard and convert it more into a Visio diagram so people don't have to read my chicken scratch. I don't have to do hieroglyphic interpretations, but it allows a visual representation. So as you're walking, whether it's team members, engineers, consultants, managers, the CTO, the CEO through it, whatever level you're talking to, it gives a reference. So always create your reference diagram. It gives you a frame to go back to. It's the blueprint. It's the master plan. In this case, we're going to do one that has both Citrix Cloud for on-premise as well as Azure subscription. So I mentioned licensing. Rich talked about this earlier. This is an important point. When you're looking at licensing, and there is a CTX article out there, 270.373, that you can reference. If you notice the 1912 LTSR, perpetual licensing. Is anybody here on perpetual licensing? All right, so there's a few hands there. 1912 you can actually use in the cloud, but that's the last one. After that, perpetual is on-premise only. So what we're looking at, if you're looking at doing a hybrid, you definitely want the cloud subscription with hybrid rights. And you can talk to the Citrix reps. I'm not a sales guy. I don't get too deep into the licensing. I just want to call this out. There's transitional trade-up plans. So if you are perpetual licensing on-premise, there is a TTU program to migrate you in a cost-effective manner into subscription licensing. Talk to your reps about that one. I don't have the details, but just keep that in mind. You always want to be mindful of your limitations. So, sizing. As we go through that layered approach, we need to look at, what's our scale? How big are we designing it? Are we doing something small? Maybe you're a small company. Perfect. Maybe you're just needing a proof of concept. Now, be wary with proof of concepts. Proof of concepts become production very quickly. Anybody in here ever run into that? Lots of hands, so yeah. So be careful. I always say design your POC like you're designing a production environment, because there's a good chance it becomes production very quickly. And these are just my numbers. This is what I call small, medium, and large. You may have different definitions, and this is not a limitation either. So if you have a large environment, you might only be creating a small because it's a subset of needs. Or vice versa, you might be a relatively small shop, but you're growing, and you want to design to enterprise scale. Perfectly valid options. There's no right or wrong here, it's what's right for you. So one of the things that always comes up, though, when we're talking about hybrid cloud, what about the access layer? What about the NetScaler or the ADC? These are some considerations, not all. I know Rich touched on this earlier too, and he has a lot of experience in the NetScaler world. Some of it's going to be a matter of complexity. Do you need all the features that the NetScaler offers? Do you need the web app firewalls? Do you need the advanced rules and policies and in-factor and step-up authentication? Or do you just need secure remote access? Some customers need the whole kit and caboodle, some just need that remote access. Now, there's other people that only need remote access, but want to keep NetScalers under their control. There's the other aspect of control. Are you giving this to Citrix to run, or are you going to run it yourself? Again, lots of factors. Cost is a factor, expertise is a factor. Do you have the budget, do you have the manpower? I've had several customers that are great candidates for running Cloud Gateway, but they want it to control failover, they want it to control the URL, they wanted to control some of the access policies. Okay, great. Well, you keep running on-premise. That's not a problem at all. When I say on-premise, I'm also referring to Azure because you can build ADCs in Azure. But these are some of the considerations. Something new that recently came out, I think it's still technically in tech preview, is the ability to choose your own URL. Has anybody done that yet with the Cloud Gateway? Rich, you played with that? I've actually not done this yet, so I haven't played with that feature yet. It's a new feature because traditionally it was always just, your name.cloud.com. Now you have the option to set your own URL. That may or may not solve your needs. Again, every environment is going to be a little bit different. As far as ADCs in Azure, not quite the same as on-premise. Now, the actual ADC code is the same. Just the way you deploy it, it's a different mindset. But if you're already doing workloads in Azure, you understand that networking in Azure is a little bit different than networking on-premise. So, these are some of the considerations that we've seen in the field. You want to use the 3 NICs or the 3 subnets. You want to stretch across availability zones if you can. Again, this is going to depend upon exactly what your subscription is. But, the idea of high availability is making sure that there's no single point of failure, so you have that fault tolerance. Another design consideration is your identity management. You have, some customers do just, single factor. I never recommend single factor anymore. We're in a high security age, please multi-factor. If you're not aware, Citrix has a token-based, a time-sensitive one-time password that's already built in. You can use that. If you don't have any other method, use that. But again, these are conversations to be had with your team because your security organization may have a specific multi-factor that you need to use. That multi-factor may or may not play nice with the Citrix Cloud. So, whoa, what do we do if that happens? Well, you have a couple of options. You can still keep that access layer on your NetScalers. You can also use your NetScaler as the identity provider for your Citrix Cloud. So that way you can give the full cloud experience, but control that authentication layer. So there's lots of options that you can do. I mean, we could have an entire session just on this one slide. I'm not going to do that to you today, but just these are some of the considerations that you want to have. What do I need to do? What do I want to do? FAS is, how many people in here use FAS? Okay, it's about half the room. So, FAS is one of those things when it was first introduced, kind of took a while to really ramp up and people understand the value. Now it's very common. What's nice is when you're doing the Citrix Cloud configuration, you can just click on the Enable FAS button. So you don't have to do anything on the access layer if you're using the Citrix Cloud Gateway. And then what you need to do is you would need to deploy the FAS servers on-premise. But what used to be I would say probably a 2 to 3 week process to really get FAS working, it has matured to the point now it's probably a 2 to 3 day process. So, the biggest thing is it does rely on your PKI, your private key infrastructure, your security certs. So as long as you have a healthy back end, this is pretty straightforward to deploy. And then as far as the control layer, when you're in the, show kind of the old and the new here, but when you're in the control layer, those of you that still have on-premise, you know all the components. You have your delivery controllers, you got your storefront, you have your director, you have your license. Some of those may be 2 or 3 components, some may be high availability. You have your SQL Server, you got all the different bits and pieces to make it run. With cloud, all that's uplifted into the cloud. And then all you need are the controllers, or the cloud connectors. It makes it very easy to scale to multiple sites. So again, coming back to the hybrid cloud, I don't have to worry about replicating all this infrastructure. All I need is just the service connector. As far as resource layers, again, we've talked about on-premise. You have your on-premise resources. You may still have some infrastructure components, such as storefronts. Some people still want their own storefront for different reasons, direct connection or branding. Maybe it ties into a NetScaler. You could do private cloud hosting. You have public cloud. The nice thing is with Citrix Cloud is you can hybrid across all of those. You could actually have a resource location in any of those. So if you want it to be really diverse in your environment, and I have several customers that have done this, you could have a resource location in Google, have a resource location in AWS, have one in Azure, have one on-premise, maybe multiples in different regions. So you can be as flexible and complex, and that's one thing I like about Citrix Cloud is they've made it easy to expand. So as far as image management goes, for years, as a matter of fact, I can tell you how long because I have a chapter in my book. So it's been at least 7 years. There was always the arm wrestle of PVS versus MCS. For the longest time, PVS, and I will admit to my own bias here, PVS is by far one of my favorite pieces of Citrix technology that they've ever released. Because for a long time, I was the guy in the chair having to do image updates at 3 a.m. and having to update 600 servers for new product code overnight is never fun. PVS came out, I'm like, sweet, so I can just hit this button and reboot them and I'm done? Awesome. So I've always been a fan of PVS. PVS kind of started to fall to the wayside because as MCS matured, it became easy. Maybe not as robust, but easy. And easy sometimes wins. And then once you got into the cloud, there wasn't a PVS in the cloud. But guess what? There is now. Has anybody done PVS in Azure? Anybody play with that? I got one hand in the back there, so not much. It is out there, so it's worth testing out, see if it works for your environment. It gives you a nice bit of portability. It also gives you some of that more granular change control that maybe you don't get with MCS. And it's not to say that one is right, one is wrong. This is back to what works for you and your environment. The same kind of conversation with profile management. What I'm seeing in most places, the default now is to do FS Logics. Because, hey, it's robust, it's free, it's built in, let's just go with it. How many people in here are using FS Logics, out of curiosity? All right, so yeah, say about 60% there. And so that's not to say, hey, don't use Citrix profile management or don't use a third-party profile management. It's more about use a profile management solution and then figure out which one is right for you and your organization. You really want to decouple user settings and user data from the workload images. That's the biggest takeaway there. And so, because you want to, in any good DaaS environment, whether it's server workloads, desktop workloads, let's say 90 to 95% of those workloads should be thrown away. I abhor statically assigned persistent images. Sometimes it's necessary, but it creates a maintenance nightmare. Why not just give them a laptop if that's the case? And I have some customers I go into, and they have 5,000 assigned desktops because, hey, it was easy, and it's what they did. So take a moment, decouple from that so you don't need those. I mean, there's always going to be the edge cases. There's always going to be some people that need it, but the majority should not. And profile management is a key to unlocking that. As far as putting it all together, we've all seen linear project plans and waterfalls and, circular, just this. It's never that simple or that easy. Now, I have been accused of turning things into experiments. So, because I want to get granular and get down to okay, I have a 20-second login, can I get that down to 15 seconds? Maybe the target was 30, so it doesn't matter, I've already beat the target, but I want to go further and deeper. And so that's something to consider of where are those thresholds that you need to meet, because you have a day job, and then you want to be able to go home from that day job and not worry about it all day. I know with IT we're kind of always on in some form or fashion, but you want to be able to unplug. So as you're planning this out, notice the biggest gear I have up here is analyze. That's your planning. That's the who, the what, the where, the things I've spent the most focus on up here. Because the more upfront analysis you have, the easier everything else becomes. Because then you can build a design, a comprehensive design off that analysis. You can test and validate. Notice that test and validate goes two directions. Because as you test and validate, you may discover things that you need, things that you didn't do, or things that didn't take. A good friend of mine once said, people don't remember when you go live, they remember how you go live. So it's much better to delay a go live if you're having issues, or to delay a cutover, than to go live and fall flat. Because that is one of those things that even when you recover from is never forgotten. So let's say we've done our design, we've done our build, we've done our analysis, we're testing that. Or we even have it, it's already running. What are some of the things that we can do to really help optimize that? Number one, right out of the gate is the optimizer. Is anybody here not familiar with the optimizer? Okay, I figured it was easier to ask it that way. So everybody's familiar with the optimizer, use it. It turns off all the unnecessary Windows stuff you don't need. It helps disable some of the things that you don't need to really streamline that image. Auto scale, this is something that when it's on-premise, it doesn't really matter as much, but in the cloud, this is critical. So I know there were a good handful of people using Azure and using Citrix on Azure. Are you all using auto scale? So yeah, got a few people using auto scale. This is critical because cloud is driven by consumption. Your cloud pricing is driven with consumption. Auto scale can help drive down that consumption because you're saying, hey, if I don't need something, turn it off. And then you power it down. And there are some newer features like a suspend and resume in Azure that's really nice. So if you're using Azure workloads now, look into autoscale and some of those power management features. If you're planning on going to Azure, look into autoscale, look into those power management features, because that will save you a lot of that consumption. It's also a good way to, it's an extra way to monitor when people are using the system as well, because you can start to build that history and see the trends, so you know how many desktops or how many servers you need powered on. This does apply to on-premise as well, especially if you're planning maintenance windows. One of the biggest things I would say is monitor. And monitoring is not a one-time thing. Benchmarking is not a one-time thing. I know we got login VSIs here, and they're not just a benchmark tool, but obviously that's how most people know them. It'd be common to run like a VSI max for how many sessions can I get on this server? How many desktops can I run concurrently? Okay, all right, that's my number, I'm done, bye. The problem is the real world doesn't work that way. Because what is your benchmark today on paper is going to be different the day you go live. It's going to be different 6 weeks post go live. It's going to be different 6 months, a year. I recommend re-benchmarking every quarter to every 6 months. So every 3 to 6 months, check your benchmarks. And the nice thing is whether you're using, Goliath or whether you're using Login or Lakeside or EG or any of these tools, Control Up, all of them, you can develop benchmarks off of. What is my performance metrics? Because it's important to know when your performance starts slipping. It's also important to know, how's my performance going? Do I need more resources? The only way to know that is to watch for it. And obviously, there's still, not for nothing, there's still Monitor or Director. If you're in Citrix Cloud, it's called Monitor. On-premise is still Director. It's the same thing. Look at that. If nothing else, even if you don't have third-party tools, use the built-in tools. They are there for you. They can really help you understand, what's my login time, what's my user performance, what's my capacity, because that's going to apply back to your design as well as your future state. And of course, you want to make sure you use your platform tools. Now, since we're talking about Azure, you have Azure Monitor that's available to you. There's desktop monitoring as well, so you can see what your performance is. I was just working with a customer a couple weeks ago. They were having all kinds of performance issues, and they had built their Azure subscription out, and they just weren't getting the performance they needed. So the first thing I asked was, well, let's see your monitor. What monitor? They didn't even know there was an Azure monitor, and that's, you don't know what you don't know, because this is one of those things that this is going to shock you. It started as a proof of concept, and then got turned into production real quick. So that's why you want to be careful. All right, so what's this got to do with my arm? What's all the things I was just talking about? It's diagnosis, it's monitoring. I went to the doctor, I was like, Doc, I took a bad fall. My wrist hurts, my elbow hurts, my shoulder hurts, I'm sore all over. How many of you all ever get a phone call? Hey, Citrix is slow. Nobody? Oh, I'm sorry, everybody, sorry. You get the call because it's that frame of reference. And so you go to your tools, you go to your monitor, you talk to the user. Okay, tell me more about what happened. How did you fall? Okay, where did you land? Understand the circumstances that led to the call. Then you go to your tool stack. Always start with the user, but then you go to your tool stack and look, let me check the logs. Let me see, was there an antivirus update going on? Was there backups running? Was there something else clogging the network? Is it the end user side? So for me, it was an MRI. Same thing as doing the analysis here. And they look, oh, no, your wrist and shoulder are just sprained, but you have a break in your elbow. That's a long way to go to get there, just to brag about my broken elbow. But the point is the same in that you're presented with these cases from users, and you don't always know where to start. So you start with the conversation, and then go into the tools. And if you don't have the tools, you're not going to be able to properly identify and grow. Now, one key takeaway, and I've already mentioned this once. This isn't just a science experiment. I've been accused of that time and again, of turning things into science experiments because I want to drill down into that last extra hop. But the real world, unfortunately, has deadlines. So understand where your guardrails are, because otherwise you get caught in that science loop. As far as right or wrong, I would say even with Citrix, even with the reference architectures, even with your expertise, even with the training, even with consultants, there's not always a right or wrong. Now, I think we can all agree there are ways you don't want to do things. There are best practices, there are leading practices, but when it comes to what's right for your environment specifically, that's going to vary. Because if you are, we heard about rendezvous earlier. That may be right for your environment, it may not be. Maybe from a security perspective, you can't use rendezvous 2. Okay, that's not an option. Maybe you have a high latency environment, so you need rendezvous 2 to really combat that latency. You have different options. HD graphics is a big thing. 3D graphics. Do you need it or do you not? Well, it really depends upon the workload. And if you ever work with me as a consultant, you're going to hear the answer, it depends a lot, because it always does. It depends upon the circumstances. So there's not necessarily a right or a wrong. Yeah. I do have just a couple minutes left here. If anybody has any questions, obviously we have the round table, so you can track me down afterwards. Anything pressing? Alrighty. So thank you all very much for letting me come out here and speak today. I appreciate the time. I appreciate Jarian, thanks for helping MC everything, and they appreciate all of you all, and thank you very much.